creation of a tax allocation district by the CCG, the Columbus Consolidated Government, simply puts the TAD mechanism in place in the designated area and does not pledge any funding to any project or entity as a result of its creation. The application for specific funding occurs when a separate and later phase of the TAD process. Again, the only thing you're going to be asked to look at over the next couple of weeks is establishing the redevelopment area and approving the plan and establishing a TAD area within that redevelopment plan itself. Nothing more, nothing less. No one's coming and asking again for financing or infrastructure improvements or anything else. That happens when they come with a real project to us. And you get that crack at that one as well, and so does staff, because we have to make that recommendation back to this council. Redevelopment plans today, as we said, there are 2 redevelopment plans ongoing right now. One is the Fort Benning Technology Park. It proposes 1 TAD area in there. And staff is currently reviewing. That is a plan that we are reviewing now and going through in terms of trying to make a determination. Does it meet all the state law criteria? Same thing about the River District redevelopment plan. In it, it's going to propose, we've been told it's going to propose at least 3 TADs in that to look at. We have received a summary of that document, but yes, as yet we do not have the redevelopment plan in hand. We are looking for it and have been told we will get it this week. But we are looking at that and trying to make some progress as we go forward on that. You should understand that the redevelopment plan and TAD approval process is not a simple thing of just coming in and asking for the boundaries themselves. First, you've got to be able to define the boundaries as they establish. You've got to set up the initial TAD financing analysis, meaning what's it going to do to that tax base, what kind of potential revenues are going to generate from that. It's got to create a redevelopment plan and a TAD area itself. And then you got to actually submit that for review, coming back to the city staff and then eventually on the council. This is the important thing I think you take away from this slide, is this is the applicant's responsibility. This is not something that city staff initiates. This is what the applicant is requested to do and required to do to fulfill the requirements before we can look at it as a TAD. Again, we don't go out and set the boundaries. We don't look at doing the redevelopment plan. That is all back on, really, the applicant from that standpoint. This is real quickly, and I won't hit all these points. I'll just hit some of the high ones. So everything you see on these next few slides are elements that have to be contained in that redevelopment plan. And just to make it even a little more simplified, we have developed a checklist here that identifies what we look for in these redevelopment plans. So that when we get an application now, which is really what it is, a redevelopment plan itself, we look for all these items to be contained in that redevelopment plan. This is not something we created. This is what was created under state law. And it's required for us to review it to make sure it meets the criteria we're looking for in establishing a TAD in our community. Of course, it talks about establishing the boundaries. It explains the proposed uses. It outlines the need for any contracts or agreements we may have to have or they may have to have with either us or other agencies involved here. It determines if there's going to be any relocation payments. Are you relocating folks? Is there a need for that? It estimates any type of redevelopment costs that may have to be incurred here. It protects properties identified as being historic in that proposed redevelopment area itself. It would also go back and contain a map that specifies the boundaries of the proposed tax allocation district that shows existing uses and conditions of real property in that area as a whole. It is trying to be holistic in terms of its approach here and looking at the conditions of the redevelopment area, other than just saying we think it needs some improvement here. The redevelopment plan has to address these items. It specifies the estimate tax allocation increment base of the proposed district. It also specifies the ad valorem property taxes for computing tax allocation payments. Estimate positive tax allocation increments for the period covered by the term of the proposed tax allocation bonds. It also looks at specifying the property proposed to be pledged for payment, if there is such a thing, or security for payment of allocation bonds in that area. It also has to look at the impact it may have on the school district and on the schools in that area. Is it going to increase the student population, things of that nature? It estimates the number of new public school students, the location of the school facilities, estimate of the SPLOST to be generated, and so forth and so on with that. And the document also, of course, as we said here, the plan also has to incorporate where that TAD may be and what you're looking for as a whole from that standpoint. The steps continue on here, and I failed to mention this because I don't want to get accused of property rights, stealing property rights. This is basically the same slide that came from Mr. Bleakley's presentation a couple weeks back. What we've done, though, is gone back and added a couple more steps we think are important to us. And that being the city staff actually reviews the plan. We have to have that time to look at it and deal with it from that standpoint. Public hearing. You've got to have public hearings for this. And we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about what those requirements are and what the constraints are going to be to us at the same time and how we deal with that. But there has to be public hearings on this. City council gets to approve the plan and or gets to really approve it with conditions or actually reject it completely. You have that option. It is not, just because it's submitted to you doesn't mean it gets carte blanche and gets approved automatically here. So council does have that choice in that. When you adopt the redevelopment plan or the TAD itself, you can do it by resolution, and that's what we normally do in this particular case. The redevelopment plan itself, when it's submitted to us, we would actually incorporate that as part of the resolution itself, because that, again, defines everything we're trying to accomplish in that area, and it sets up the boundaries and all that comes with it. And again, council may approve with conditions, or approve it outright, or just deny the document completely from that. The adoption, I'm sorry.
Will you turn on Councilor Huff's, please? Thank you.
Just a quick question. Going back to the steps, yeah, right there. Once it gets to you for the review, how soon do we get it before it gets back to us for approval?
In a normal situation,
Yeah,
I would say within 30 days it would get to you. In a normal situation.
So will we have information prior
Yes.
to public hearings, so we'll
Yes.
understand what's going on?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay. And would you turn on Isaiah's microphone, please?
And when he says normal, I just want to be clear. This is we're dealing with an expedited process
An expedited request.
or request.
Yes.
Yes, because in future years, I think we're asking that any that would be coming forward requests from developers or stakeholders would get to our planning staff no later than the 1st of August. And then we would be able to work through a normal process. And so I just wanted to be clear, what we're dealing with today is not what we would see going forward as the normal process.
Okay, and in this expedited process, will we get the financial analysis and
Yes.
things that we need?
Yes.
That's what
Yeah.
we're working to make sure you get, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I've had someone to sit down with me and give me a lot of information and financial analysis, and I'm just wondering, will I get that from the additional ones that we are to consider? Okay, thank you.
In dealing with the adoption of the redevelopment plan and TAD, there is, like we said, there is a public hearing process, as there should be with this type of activity that goes on. There is required one public hearing on the redevelopment plan prior to doing anything else. And that public hearing, we would establish in front of council. The law doesn't really specify where that public hearing needs to be held, but we think it needs to be in front of council. The city manager has instructed us that it needs to be in front of you, so you understand what's going on and how we deal with this. And so we would establish that public hearing at a council meeting itself. It requires at least 5 business days.
Would you just leave the city manager's mic on, please?
And I would say again, it's because this is an expedited request, I'll say. And he'll talk about, and you know, of course, the new city council schedule. And so if we're going to have a public hearing and then a separate discussion, I think we're required to have two. If we have it here at the city council meeting and you get to be involved in it, and those here and those watching by television will be able to follow up or know how to contact us or the stakeholder or developer to ask questions, we think we can get a lot done in a shorter period of time. And so we'd like to have a public hearing here and then a second discussion here, and then if you're comfortable at that point, and then you can take a vote on the resolution.
Yeah, I'm good with the process that you put forth and the expedited way we're doing it. I'm just making sure that we get the right information.
Sure.
Showing that the financial analysis, what is to take place and how it benefits, because there is a question or two. There are questions out there that will indicate that we as a body don't have all the information.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. All right, Councilor Woodson.
Yes,
If you'll turn on Councilor Woodson, thank you.
thank you. Rick, I have 2 questions for you. I know the packet that you're showing us is going into the future for applications for the TADs that are to come, because isn't it by law we can have up to 10? Am I correct? We can have up to 10?
No, the law requires you can't go beyond 10% of your tax
Oh,
digest.
10% of the digest, okay. Thank you for that correction. And so if it allows you to go 10%, how many other additional TADs can we have besides the 4 we're going to get?
Well, right now, we're looking at a marginal rate, and I will let the applicants come forward and tell you what those are, because that is a chief concern of ours as well. We've raised it from the very beginning that we cannot, I don't believe this council would buy into it either, that we go beyond a certain percentage over this first round with issuing TADs. I mean, I think we need to keep it somewhere below that 5% or lower, really, in terms of what we're talking about with the tax digest, because what we're doing is locking ourselves in for the future with those TADs from here on out, for at least the next 20, 25 years or longer. And that still gives us a gap, Councilor Woodson, in terms of the percentage we can deal if someone else comes in with a viable TAD as well, so we don't box ourselves out of this later on when we're trying to deal with this issue.
We can, and I don't think we're necessarily limited by a number of TADs. We're limited by the 10% of the digest. And so once we reach that 10%, then I don't think we can go beyond, we can't go beyond that, I don't believe by law.
Okay. I have forgotten that it was a percentage.
It's 10%, and that's why we were careful when the group was here a couple of weeks ago to share with you the percentage of the digest that those 3 TADs would take up, and it was somewhere around 3%, and I'm sure they'll cover that again today, of the 10% of the digest. So not by a number of TADs, but by the limit of 10% of your gross digest.
Okay. We got Councilor Baker.
Sorry.
And would you mute Councilor Woodson's only so there's not static as others are talking?
Director, just as far as the process goes, let's say not the district, but a project, specific project came in and it was to be mixed use, but it just happened to be zoned residential, then would that have to go by default through the PAC process?
Yes. Now, the zoning part of the property itself would still have to go through the normal channels.
So you got to post the signs,
All
put a
that.
PAC.
Exactly.
Okay.
Whatever project comes forward, though, is imperative on staff to sit down. As you'll notice in the policy and guidelines, we do set up a committee just to review these applications when they come in. They will still have to come in, though, meet all the criteria that we establish as a government here as far as development goes. That means the zoning part of it, building permits, engineering, all that is still in play. What the TAD provides is the potential really for, in terms of offering some type of incentives or assistance, if you want to call it that, in making that development occur.
I'll follow you there. It's getting used to, the last few years, I've been approaching it as a TAD project, and now all of a sudden we're saying it's TAD districts.
Right.
And it's just trying to get used to rather than a specific project, predetermining a district, which is something I never,
Well,
I always thought we would have a specific project and then determine the footprint of the district around the project.
the Council Baker, the only thing I can offer you in return that comes to that is the enterprise zone itself. We establish the enterprise zone before we ever have projects come about.
No, I'm not faulting it. It's just trying to get used to.
Sure, I understand.
Because even within this, even within the 10%, you've got issues like we may not be comfortable. I believe it can go up to 15% of the job cost.
Right.
We may only be comfortable with 5 or 10%.
Right. Exactly.
Or certainly going out 20 or 25 years, we may limit it to 10 because then we can see the end line where 10 years is going to be. And it would free up another project after that point.
That's correct.
So there are a lot of parameters even within the 10% of the digest.
That's correct.
That get set on a what? On a project by project basis. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. What I want to try to convey to you is, and like I said, eliminate some of the anxiety is, you're not dealing with projects today, but we're going to have to talk about them eventually. But what you're establishing in the next couple of weeks, we hope, is the area that can be considered for TADs and for these projects to come forward. You still get a bite of the apple, though, when that happens, because they still have to come back for approval from this council for their individual project. If there are any individual projects that come forward, this council makes that final determination.
One last question. I know there's some other questions. At what point do we begin to sacrifice the incremental increase in assessments?
That I don't have an answer for you. That's a good question.
That would be January 1st. If you establish these boundaries by December 31st, then the tax assessor has to provide us, and we have to provide the state, I believe, with the digest, the total digest within the boundary of each TAD. And then going forward January 1st, the city would continue to get whatever that amount was determined as of December 31st, and then any growth starting January 1 would be what the increase in digest would be, and the taxes from that increase would be used for infrastructure and support.
I guess one of the concerns I have was that we are forfeiting a natural growth in that digest, if there is any, without having any projects. If you see now, we're at 50-something days, we can barely pay the bills, and we're forfeiting a growth in the digest that's already there without any projects. So that's why I'm concerned at how soon we cut off that growth that would accrue to the city, but now will accrue to the TAD. It's just a concern. You don't need to comment on it. I mean, it's just a concern.
Let me comment, because that's an excellent
It really
point.
is.
And I think that comes into consideration when you're looking at the particular district. If it is one where there's activity going on, then of course you have a much more likelihood of natural growth while it's sitting there without a specific project. And so I would think that the legislators would be very interested in how soon do you expect a project to come along in this district that has economic activity going on that should be incurring some sort of natural growth. And so I would imagine there would be a lot of interest in that. Now, if you had another district where it was just nothing, just nothing going on, just vacant land and nothing going on, I think you can feel reasonably sure you're not going to have anything but a de minimis type of appreciation. So you may be willing to take a little longer bet, if you will, on when a project might come along. So I think that's all an excellent point of the legislative consideration and give and take of what types of districts and what the boundaries are, what's going on inside those districts as you set the boundaries.
Thank you.
Sure. Councilor Henderson, did you have something?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, by the way, I just don't see you lit up, so if you'll wave or something. Counselor Henderson.
If I can get this turned on. Thank you.
Wait, would you turn on? Yes, there you go.
Thank you. You know, I called myself knowing a little bit about TADS even back a couple of years ago when we first started talking about them. And the more we get into the details, the more I realize I didn't really I have a full grasp of the mechanics of it. And what we just identified, I think, causes me pause a little bit. My initial reaction was the projects that are being presented, the districts that are being presented, no harm, no foul. If we go ahead and we name those, we have an opportunity to evaluate them as the projects come up. But if we're going to draw a line in the sand with regards to our tax, the ad valorem taxes we're receiving from property, that changes the game to me, because now there is a risk. Because even if my original thought was, and I'll be very frank, the more I look at it, the more I had envisioned TADS is addressing what the mayor just touched on. That's an area where there's nothing going on, and this is an opportunity to, without risk of much, if any, loss in tax revenue, we had an opportunity to stimulate some infrastructure that would encourage private investors to start developing projects that would then raise and give us a much more accelerated rate of tax income than we ever would have seen in that area. But with some of the projects that have been presented, some of the districts that have been presented, there's already some growth, and I intend to check with the tax assessor, because I noticed on the checklist we have to see what the last 10 years of tax income has been in that area, and if there is already an average increase that is comparable with what's going on in the rest of the community, it's tougher to carve that out, hoping that there'll be a project that we can okay. One of the questions I had, though, is if we approve a district, what's the process as we go through it and we identify other districts that we think this is a better tool for? How do we, or is it even possible to change our mind on a district that's already been approved?
My limited experience and knowledge about this is yes, you can, but you still have to go back through the same process we're initiating here now and show basically there's nothing to that effect. So I'm sure Mr. Bleakley's here. I'm sure when he comes, he can provide you a better answer than I can on that one.
And I guess where I am on this now is from the outset, I was let's go ahead and let's approve districts, and then let's evaluate the projects as they come forward, and then we can take a look at what percentage of our total tax digest that is and how much it eats into it, and are there other areas that we think this is a better use. But if we're going to forego additional increases in the tax digest, and we don't really feel fully comfortable maybe just yet with projects in that area, I'm much more hesitant to approve the proposed districts, just me personally.
And Councilor Henderson.
We have Counselor Thomas, and I think that is one question that I certainly would like Mr. Bleakley to address. I know in Atlanta, I think either they did or they tried to close a district. I'm not sure if they did, but there was a process, and I'd like to hear about that. Counselor Thomas.
On this slide, Mr. Jones, the public hearing that is noticed here, what would that cover? Would it be this first one be the boundaries of the district, what's included in that district? Is that what we're doing with that one?
Primarily, yes. You'll have the information in front of you of what the proposed redevelopment plan calls for in that area and what TAD we would be establishing in that redevelopment area. You'd have all that information in front of you at that public hearing just to hear out. And that also will provide for public comments, of course, as well at that same time.
Well, one of the things that Councilor Huff said earlier that I hope everybody takes notice of is that it is going to be imperative for me, to have this information before we get to a hearing. For example, the districts that you have outlined up here, we haven't seen a map of any of those districts.
Correct.
We've seen a slide presentation, a PowerPoint presentation that very quickly went through some of those districts. But the specifics of what is included in each one of those districts, we haven't seen. And before it comes to me, for me to vote on the parameters of that district, I want to have in my hot little hand a map that shows me that. Because, for example, as I recall, and I'm a visual person, so I'm going to give you some examples, and please, this is strictly examples. I'm not proposing anything. But I remember seeing, for example, in the Liberty District TAD, that it included 6th Avenue, between 6th Ave, the buildings between 6th Avenue and the railroad yard. That includes, for example, the old Swift Mill site that we just today saw an exception that they want to change from light manufacturing to general so that they can put in retail. Okay. My question at some point is going to be, so do we need to include that piece in this tag? I don't know the answer to that. That's one of the questions that I have. So I'm hoping that before we get to this public hearing, a lot of those kinds of questions will be answered. One of the other, so that the Liberty District folks won't think I'm picking on them, let's pick on Uptown. One of the things in the Uptown District is the Marriott across from the Trade Center. The Marriott already has had, as I understand it, some economic incentives. Okay? So do they need to be included in this TAD district? I don't know. Those are some of the kinds of things that I would want at some point for us to have the conversation about.
And Councilor Thomas, I would say it as clearly as I possibly can. That is the responsibility of city staff, is to go through that document, go through this checklist, make sure everything is we're comfortable with it before we can make a recommendation back to this council. We don't expect you to come through here and have to start at square one looking at the plan itself. We want you to. We want you to read from page to cover, but at the same time, city staff has got to come and tell you what we see in the document itself. Are there any pitfalls? Are there any problems? Are there any issues? What does this plan really say to us, and what should it be saying to you as a council? So eventually you can make the right decision.
You know, and Mr. Jones, I have every confidence in our staff that when you bring us a plan, if again, for example, in the Uptown it includes the Marriott facility, and I ask you this question, I know that our staff will have already looked at that and made some decisions about that. I don't have a problem with that at all.
I understand, please, from all of us, that we're all in the same boat together. This is a brand new process for us,
right?
A brand new thing, and we're trying to work through it as best we know how to accommodate not only the applicant's needs here, but also your needs as well. And my main objective is make sure that you have all the information in front of you in a timely fashion, so that you can render a decision back before the end of this year.
One of my concerns is this long list of things that our staff is going to be taking a look at, and I'm hoping that we not only have currently employed staff who can do this, who have the time to do this, but also has the expertise to do this. And this, I think, takes some special expertise. For example, one of the things that the applicant has a responsibility is the TAD financial analysis. I assume, and maybe that's the wrong thing to do, but I assume that when someone brings a TAD to us, they will have had some kind of expert look at that financial analysis. Well, then we need an expert on our staff to check and make sure their expert is correct. We'll put our expert up against their expert anytime. So it's not just it's not a quick kind of thing that we can do, and I want us to get it right and do it right and approve as many of these as we can and still maintain our fiscal responsibility and integrity. It's really, sometimes makes my head spin. Thank you.
And we have, oh, I'm sorry, did you want to?
No, and I was just going to say, to respond to the question of whether we have the internal experts in the financial analysis. I mean, obviously, we just we heard from the Deputy City Manager of Finance earlier, and we're not getting ready to hire people or contract out things, and so our financial experts will be our finance staff. And so it will be the Deputy City Manager or Finance Director, Assistant Director, accountants that we have internally. It will be the internal staff, just to be clear.
And if I may, Mayor, who already are working 40 hours a week and
Plus.
doing what they're supposed to be doing, and now I don't anticipate that this TAD approval is going to be a full-time job. I think that once we get over this initial hump and we say, let's have them by August, it'll give us some
Exactly.
room to breathe. But in the meantime,
we're going to have to burn a little extra oil
We
to get
need to
this
be-
done,
right.
but as we go to a normal process after we get through the end of this year, we would want people, developers, stakeholders, to adhere to our normal process, which would be, if your project is going to be considered, we need to have it by August 1st. And that gives us the time to work through it and get this done by the end of the year, by December 31st. So, but for what we are dealing with, the proposed boundaries for 4 TADs, I mean, it's just something we got to get done, and we do that. Forrest totally went home at 7:15 a.m. the other morning because he had some problems, and so
Absolutely.
we do what we got to do.
And one interesting comment on the expert that Councilor Thomas stated is that these folks who are doing this get, I think, almost all of their information from our staff. I mean, they can tell you if there's I think they obviously look at things and calculate things, but I'd like to hear from them when they do get the opportunity to speak of how much our staff is really providing the information on which they're basing all this stuff
I would
anyway.
assume they talk
So,
to the
yeah.
tax assessor or.
Right, and so the tax assessor and the finance director and Rick's office and all of that. So it's pretty staff intensive even before we get the application, and usually our staff is the source of their information. But anyway, that's just a side note. I know Councilor Davis has something, and he wanted to hear from Mr. Bleakley. Councilor Davis.
Well, I wanted to hear what you talked about, Mayor, about Mr. Bleakley talking about closing out the TADs. I think I've heard of a TAD, maybe 2 in Atlanta, that have been closed out for various reasons. I'd like to. I can't comment on that, but I think Mr. Bleakley can. I would like to say something about. I know there was concern about the. One of the issues here is that the City of Columbus, as Councilor Baker said, will not receive the tax benefits of the developed property for extended time because it's being used to be a resource for redevelopment. But I think that maybe, and I'm not sure the appropriate time, but maybe that could be handled from a standpoint of the maturity of the TAD. And I think it says in the guidelines, and Mayor, I know that today we are. This is another step in progress, and we're moving at a fast pace. And certainly, I've enjoyed the last couple of weeks trying to play catch up. But I thought I knew a little bit about TADs, but I've learned a lot in that period of time. But from the maturity standpoint, I believe you can always extend the maturity further out, but maybe you might not want to get locked in so far out so you can understand that aspect of it a little bit to see what, if you're able to accomplish your goals. The other thing, I'm glad the city manager and Councilor Thomas mentioned it because it was on my list to talk about, even though, in respect, we are talking about proposals on districts today, as well as a conversation of continuing answer questions and trying to understand the process and procedures and policies. I think that this council needs to really take light of what was just said. I see the more things that we're doing, whether it's TADS, whether it's T-Splots, whether these other efforts, we're going to have to find a new way to replenish the revenues that we need to operate the city. And I see it coming. I think we're going to have to start having the conversation on expanding urban service districts. I think we're going to have a conversation on impact fees to cover the cost of what we're doing now from the city aspect. I think we're going to have to talk about maybe even creating CIDs. I don't know. That seems to be a new trend in the state of Georgia. But I do see a need to support our staff. I do see a need in the extra resources to do the analysis to make sure that we do head in the right direction, that everything's being done appropriately. Everybody wins at the end of the day, but I know personally, I think this council knows that our staff is already challenged tremendously from that standpoint. So I hope we have that conversation and how we can support on the city side with the staff and the necessary resources, professional resources. And that may be consulting, I don't know. That may be hiring an analyst, I don't know. But I think we're going to have that conversation because we are asking our people to do a tremendous amount in this, and you just can't expect everybody to get it right every time under that kind of pressure. So, Madam Mayor, I think it's probably appropriate as we go to, if you're in agreement with it, to continue to ask questions as they surface. But I do want to hear from Mr. Bleakley on what you talked about.
Why don't we, Rick, how much more do you have left?
I got a couple more slides.
Okay.
Here we need to
Why
cover.
don't you finish up, and then, Mr. Bleakley, I think the two questions I hear that you should address when you come up is, one, what is the process for closing a TAD, and has that been done? I know in East Point they considered it. I think they made a political decision not to close the TAD, is my recollection, but I'd like to hear from you on that. And then the length of a TAD, can you set a shorter length and then extend it? Is that preferred, or does it have some sort of negative consequence? So, Mr. Jones, let's finish up, and then we can.
Okay. The last two slides I really want, or last three slides, I want to point out to you, is this business about notification and setting up this public hearing. Again, there really are two meetings here that can be done from that standpoint. It still requires 5 business days of notification ahead of time. Some of you are familiar with how we deal with zoning, and we're required to do at least a 15-day notice ahead of time before it comes to council. That's 15 calendar days. There is a quirk in the state law that says basically anything less than 10 has to be 5 business days, and the city attorney pointed that out to me yesterday, which I do appreciate, which means that whatever time span we have between meetings, or in terms of setting that meetings up, actually shrank. We lost about 3 days in that process, or 2 days at the most in that. But you got to have at least the one public meeting in front, 5 days again. Then the second meeting to actually approve the plan, you still got to have a notification process. Well, we run an ad in the paper and get the word out and all that. It deals with that. This is the crux of the whole conversation, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of how we go forward here in dealing with this. Because we only have 2 real council meetings we can handle this issue. You cannot take care of it next week because I don't have time to get the ad out. You don't have the information. We don't have the information to give. So it would be futile for us to set up a meeting anyway if we could for next Tuesday. We just don't have the time, and time constraints are really on that. So you're looking now at the 8th and 15th as being those meeting dates that you can hear it and decide on these issues that come forward involved with that. In order for us, and I want you to understand this, in order for us to get the ad out, it has to go out for that first meeting at least no later than December 1st. It has to appear in the paper on December 1st, that day, in order for us to hear it on December 8th. 5 business days, not calendar days, 5 business days. In order for us to meet the 15th, the latest we could advertise again would be on December 8th, which of course, December 8th, which of course is the day you're going to have the public hearing to hear the application request to begin with. That seems a little quirky also, but that's what we have to do in terms of meeting state law requirements and meeting the time constraints we're dealing with here as a council. I want to make you aware of that fact. We're asking, I guess, and I want you to hear from the others today as well, but we're going to be asking about how we should go forward with this process in terms of making the ad, because the crux of the whole conversation is making sure we get the ads out and get everything set in front of the council, along with the information, in a timely fashion to make this all work. Last thing I want to share with you real quick in dealing with the steps itself here is you still got, eventually you'll have to have this discussions with the school district. Some of the applicants are taking that on themselves now and having at least preliminary conversations with the school district.
Well, now, Rick, I think that is completely in the purview of the applicant.
It is.
I wouldn't mind if there was something, a courtesy, if the mayor or council wanted to call, but I think that's completely in the purview.
And that's my whole point is involved with that is there has to be some conversation, not necessarily by the city. The city can be a partner with that and act as the information source back to the school district, but that has to happen somewhere. If the school district is going to be a player in this whole TAD process when it's all said and done.
And also, I would like to hear from Mr. Bleakley. I believe that can occur if all of this is done. I believe the school district can make any approvals after the
Correct.
31st.
Correct.
And that seems to be what is the driving date for some of these stakeholders,
Right.
is they want to do things by the 31st.
Right.
It's really only council that has to do something.
Council is the only one constrained right now by the date. The school district is not involved with that. But there has to be some concurrence. If the school district is going to be a player in this in terms of doing the tax abatements and whatnot, they have to give their concurrence to that. Eventually, not eventually, but if the TADs are approved, we still have to notify the Department of Revenue, the State Department of Revenue, about what the TADs are going to look like, and they will basically have to certify that information, send it back to us, and we start from there in dealing with the TADs from that. Again, my objective here is to make sure you understand that the only thing that we're going to be talking about for the next couple of weeks is reviewing the redevelopment plan and potentially establishing TADs in this community. That's all we're doing. We're not talking about any particular project or doing any type of bonding issues or funding issues. That comes at a later date, and it has a much more extensive review process. That comes out, that's why it was so important that we adopt these policies and guidelines and know what we're supposed to be doing when it's all said and done with these tasks. And so that's, Madam Mayor, that's where I will leave it this morning.
All right, we have Councilor Thomas.
Mr. Jones, the discussion with the school district, does the district's ultimate decision is whether or not they participate in the finance piece of this?
Yes,
Is
ma'am.
that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
And so would the school district have an approval, if you will, of the participation in the districts or in the projects?
Right now, in the district. Eventually in the project, yes, in terms of looking
So
at what that-
they get to say, what
No,
would their,
no, no,
what would they do with the
we-
districts, I guess?
They're basically, and I'll let Mr. Bleak come, he can do a much better job than I can on this issue. They will give their approval basically about dealing with the taxes itself. The actual project, though, comes back to us. They do sit down as part of the committee, as outlined in the policies here, in terms of making that determination about whether the project should go forward or not. They do that and make that determination with us. But council makes the final determination in terms of how these projects are
The
handled.
council makes the final decision on the boundaries of the district, right?
Correct.
And so the school district has input into that decision, or they can,
Their only concern is dealing with the actual taxing itself and not necessarily
Right.
set the establishment of the boundaries. And if I may be wrong about that, but
As I understand it, the school district can opt in or opt out.
Right.
And so that's with boundaries.
Well, I know that they
or-
can with the tax implications, but I guess I'm having a problem figuring out how they do the districts. Maybe
Well,
Mr.
yeah, and let's do hear
Well-
from Mr. Bleakley,
Bleakley
because I
can deal
think
with
they
that one,
agree
too.
whether they will limit their receipt of the increment, the growth. That's their discussion. As far as approving the projects, I just don't know what their involvement is in that. I didn't think they had any.
And
But-
before you go away, Mr. Jones, I want one other about the hearings. Am I correct in that the first public hearing would be sort of like a first reading hearing that we do on other ordinances?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
And then the second meeting is the second reading kind of thing?
the actual
And
adoption.
then at that point, council can act to approve or not approve or amend or whatever?
that's correct, yes, ma'am.
Okay, I just want to make sure I've got that sequence.
Is there anyone else in line, or should we hear from Mr. Bleakley?
We need to hear from them
Okay.
next. Yeah.
All right, well, we've got, however you all want to do it, we've got, what do you need?
Process.
Okay, we've got Councilor Davis.
Thanks, Mayor. While we're on this process, Mr. Jones, I'd like to, this is something that's very important. I think people need to understand this. A TAD in general, TAD district is very, very restrictive about who can participate in the TAD. And that was one of the questions, concern I had. I'm in development, so certainly it would affect me. But I want to read this out of the law of the state of Georgia. It says, no elected official or appointed official or employee of a political subdivision or board, commission, or redevelopment agency thereof shall voluntarily acquire any interest, direct or indirect, or in any property included or planned to be included in the redevelopment area, or any contract or transaction or proposed contract or transaction in connection with the redevelopment of the redevelopment area. Now and I'm going to go on record now, say that I don't own any land in what's being proposed. I have in the past have interest, and certainly I'd like to develop from a company standpoint in the area, but I can't as of today and as of the future unless I am not in an elected capacity, okay? And I'm going to go on record and say that right now. I understand the law is that I could be an employee or I could be a consultant, but I cannot own any interest in land or property in these districts, nor can any other elected official, what I just read. Now,
Councilor Davis.
Yes, sir.
And I hear Ken Blakely saying that's not correct, so
Okay, well,
you
we
may
need
want
to-
to hear from him.
We do need to talk about that then, because that's one of the questions I had that I've tried to get answered in this short amount of time, so that would help. But I guess my question there, as I said that, in this process, how is that understood, or is that something in this process that needs to be disclosed?
I don't believe so, Councilor Davis. That actually comes again when we're dealing with the individual projects themselves, when there is financial gain or loss to be made here or anything else. That's why I would be concerned about it. In establishing those, again, I'll have to yield to the city attorney on that, but my understanding is, no, that would not be an issue. I think we have to concern ourselves at this time.
Yeah. Now,
Well,
I
if
think
it
we might
is-
need to hear from the lawyers on that, because I read it the same way Councilor Davis does, but I read it yesterday.
Well,
which
if that is the law, unless the law has
that
changed.
you have to announce it. Yeah, the law may have changed, but the lawyers
Somewhere in
just
here, right?
said yesterday that you have to announce it 30 days before the public hearing. So let's just say hypothetically, it doesn't sound like there's any counselors that have acquired property within the last 2 years
There
within these
is a
districts, but I don't
provision
know.
about 2 years, and I think we
Right.
do have.
So let's just say hypothetically, there was a counselor who had, or elected official, who had recently acquired property in one of these 4 proposed districts. As I understand the city attorney's guidance, then that counselor would have to announce such 30 days before the public hearing and then recuse themselves from discussion and vote.
That's right. We looked at this extensively yesterday. And of course, Ms. Sheftel has looked at this extensively for the past couple of weeks with the memo she's passed out to you. But with respect to any elected official of this body, the council, owning property in a redevelopment area or a planned redevelopment area, if you've bought property within the last 2 years, you have to disclose it in writing by letter to the clerk of council, and you cannot participate in discussion or vote on that particular plan or district. Now, if you bought property more than 2 years ago, that disclosure is not required. Once a redevelopment plan is adopted, the way we read the law, no member of this body up here can acquire property in the redevelopment area. And that's just the way the state law reads. But with those qualifications, if you bought something within the last 2 years and one of these TADs that ends up being adopted, you've got to disclose it in writing, and then you can't participate in that discussion and vote.
And then once the district is approved, no elected official while in elected office can acquire property in
That's
any
right.
TAD
Well, that's the way we read it. Mr. Blakely may have another take, but
Okay, well, if so, then we'd have to go back and do some research. So, but anyway, that's what our city attorney has advised us. Councilor Davis, did you have anything else?
No, and I just wanted, that's just not the council, that's all elected officials.
All elected officials.
Whether you have a business or not, it's all elected officials and employees.
Yeah, I guess employees, I didn't read that, but if that's what it says, if that's, what does it apply to?
Right,
Put in
and
all
it's-
elected officials and
and-
employees?
yes, of the political subdivision, which would be elected, appointed officials or employees of a political subdivision. So,
Of CCG.
right.
And let me add this, Mayor, I believe that
It
does
says
not
of
apply.
a political subdivision, so that arguably includes the school district.
It does
We don't
not apply-
represent them.
It does not apply to state and federal officials.
That's right, does not.
All right. Well, it's just something you got to know. So I guess that's it. Mr. Bleakley, if you want to come forward and speak to the couple issues.
All elected officials need to stay too.
Morning, Mayor and Council. Good to see you all this morning. You had asked about 4 questions, and let me just briefly address those. You talked about what was the termination date in terms of the district. Most of the districts are set with either a 25 or 30-year term. They can be renewed at your 25 to 30-year term. So they can be renewed in the 24th or 29th year if you decide to extend it past that, but the typical term of the district is 25 to 30 years. If you make it shorter, the challenge you face is a financial one, that it's difficult to have long-term financing if you have a shorter time period. And given the increments that you're going to generate, you want to have an amortization table that's at least 20 years long to make those payments as reasonable as possible. It's just like your home loan. If you borrow the money for 10 years, your monthly payment is way higher than if you borrow the money for 30 years. So the hope is that by having the 25-year term, you can pay that note off faster, but you want to have the ability to be able to borrow for longer periods of time. So typically, you look around the state, their TADs are either 25 or 30 years in length. Now, in terms of when the district can end, at any point, the council has the ability to terminate the district if there has been no debt issued on that district. So you could create a TAD, 5 years, 7 years could go by and nothing's happened. You could concur, the council could basically say, hey, we tried it, didn't work, we're going to fold it up. At that point, the district would end. Any money that had been collected would be rebated back to you and to the school board that are in the fund, and the TAD would no longer exist. Once you issue debt, particularly it's tax-exempt debt, you have to make a provision to pay that debt back. Okay, you cannot close the district and have outstanding debt. But you could, if you had enough money to reserve that payment, you could reserve enough money to pay those bonds back and say we're not going to do any future investment. But once you issue a bond, usually the district's going to run its course, or at least to repay those bonds. You mentioned, Mayor, the issue about closing some of the TADs early. The City of Atlanta has looked at, they have 10 TADs in the city. They are up to their 10% cap. They have looked at the idea of closing out what's called the East Side TAD, which is basically on the east side of downtown. And the mayor has proposed as an idea for the next year to close that TAD out. There is existing financing in place. They will reserve the money they need to pay that financing back, and then they will basically stop the TAD from going forward. The other thing you can do instead of closing the TAD is just not accept any new applications for funding. So the TAD can be in existence. You can be paying off debt that you have in the district, but you just don't accept any more applications from the TAD. The city has done that on several occasions in terms of the project. So again, once you create the district, then you have a lot of flexibility in terms of what projects get financed, what the terms of those projects are going to be, and how long that period is going to be in terms of financing. So, and then I think you had a question about the school district. Basically, the school district has two things that it looks at. If you make the decision to create a tax allocation district, there will be a document called the Tax Allocation District Redevelopment Plan that you'll adopt. So by resolution, you will adopt that plan. And that plan effectively is like a business plan for the TAD, and that's the document that has currently been submitted for the Benning Tech Park project and will be submitted this week for the other 3 TADs. Once you accept that, the school board's role is basically twofold. One is to review that plan and decide to accept it or not accept it. And by their acceptance, they then pledge their millage, the school's millage, in that district to the city. So the TADs will be operated by the city. It is your responsibility. They're your district. The school board merely concurs to participate with you in that process. And as Mr. Jones has outlined, in your policies, you've set up a review committee for each TAD as you go forward, and you've given seats, proposed that the school board, should they participate in a TAD, would have a seat in that review process. And so they will be aware of projects as they go along. They will know what's going on in the TAD district. Ultimately, the approval of any projects will be the responsibility of the council. So since you're the group that potentially issues the financing, it's your responsibility to make those decisions. So the school board is what's called concurrence. They're basically saying, yes, we adopt the redevelopment plan as approved by city council, and B, we pledge our millage inside that district to the TAD district. That's basically the two things that the school board has to do.
Councilor Thomas.
I have 2 questions. One, let's continue with the school board.
Okay.
So the school board says to us, we concur with this district, and then do we also then talk with them about individual projects? Could they then say an individual project, we're not going to deal with that?
They will have a role to play on your advisory committee, and that's how they will know about those projects. But in most TADs around the state, once the school board gives its concurrence to your creation of the district and the use of the millage, the projects are your responsibility, not the school.
So that if the school board, for example, said to us, we will approve the Fort Benning TAD.
Yes.
We concur that that's a good deal, and we'll give you our money.
Yes.
Then no matter what the project is in that district, they participate by...
They're basically a passive financial partner other than their involvement in your advisory committee. That's the way they participate in an ongoing way.
Okay. The other question that I had, you were talking about closing early except in a district where debt has been issued. The proposals that are coming before us are fairly large in area.
Yes.
And so, for example, and this is just generally, the City Village TAD is from about 18th Street north to about Manchester Expressway, about the old 45th Street. So are you saying that if we were to approve any project within that district in which debt was issued, then we couldn't, at any future date, rearrange that district? We couldn't say, we're not going to go all the way to Manchester Expressway,
Yes.
We're just going to go to 38th Street?
By law, there is a procedure where you can amend the boundary, To my experience, no one has ever
No one
done
has
that
ever done
because
that.
it's such an onerous.
I
Well,
probably am the only one who'd think about that.
No, it's actually been thought, there have been several instances where it's been thought about. The challenge is the state requires that if you amend the boundary, let's say you create a TAD today, 5 years down the road, you say, oh, gee, we forgot, we want to include ABC in the area. You then have to reassess, you have to bring the valuation in the district up till the year you do the amendment. So all the increment from the previous years, you don't have access